Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the IAPH Mercado Media World Ports Conference webinar, an annual State of Ports Industry Report, the IAPH World Ports Tracker 2025 briefing on sustainability and market trends. My name is Victor Shea. I'm IAPH's Communications Director. I'll be moderating a very busy next hour or so. But before we start, please let me introduce you to our IAPH Managing Director, Patrick Verhoeven, for some opening remarks. Patrick?
Thank you very much, Victor, and also from my side, a very warm welcome to this webinar. It is devoted to a new publication that we're presenting today. The title might seem familiar to you, or at least to many of you, the World Ports Tracker. You may remember that we started this initiative during the pandemic when we did on a regular basis a survey among the global ports community to find out about the impact of the pandemic on market developments. And we continued that also well through in the years afterwards. What we are presenting today is a totally new format. It's no longer a quarterly report, it's an annual report that doesn't only cover market trends, but would also present the state of sustainability of the port sector. And it's based on a survey that we did in the beginning of the year amongst the IAPH membership. So that's why we dubbed this webinar also like the annual State of the Ports Industry Report that we're proudly presenting here. And even if the format and content of the World Ports Tracker has changed, what has not changed is the team behind the tracker. And I'm very pleased that we have here with us today Theo Notteboom from the University of Antwerp and Ghent University, and Thanos Palis from the University of Piraeus, who have analyzed the data and presented them in a comprehensive report, of which they will present the highlights in a few minutes. So the same never change a winning team, I think, is the expression that we've done since 2020. And I'm very glad, Theo, Thanos, that you are with us today. And I'm also very grateful for the work that the IAPH team has done in getting this on the road, preparing the survey, setting up the digital infrastructure, chasing members to respond, and in the end to deliver a very nicely edited product. And of course, special thanks to all the IAPH member ports who participated in the survey. You have provided now a basis for an annual report that you will be able to simply update on an annual basis based on your information that you can provide and share with us online. And for those member ports attending that did not take part in the survey, I would really strongly encourage you to do so next year. And I hope that today's presentation will give you the incentive. Some regions remain a little bit underexposed, and we hope that you will make the effort in the future to join the survey so we can indeed provide also solid analysis for all the regions in our membership. So with those words of introduction, Victor, I gladly hand it back to you, and then we can start the presentations. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Patrick. Just as a point of information, we invite all of you to either provide comments in the chat or place your questions to Theo and Thanos in the Q&A section, which we'll try and answer during the webinar. If there are any pending due to lack of time, we shall send you the responses after the session, okay? So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for writing the latest IAPH World Ports Tracker, the updated version. I guess in the first part of this webinar, we'll examine sustainability trends, and in the second section, market trends. But before that, gentlemen, if you could tell us a little bit about the survey itself that you co-developed with our technical director, Antonis Michael, and the profile of the member ports responding.
Yes, hello everybody. First of all, it's a real pleasure to join this webinar. Maybe you can bring up the presentation, Wu. Thank you so much. So maybe a first introductory part brings you a little bit an idea of what kind of data sources we used in order to compile this new World Ports Tracker report. There are actually two data sources. One is a survey, and Patrick already mentioned this, and also Towns and I, we are very grateful that so many of you have taken time to fill out the survey. But on top of that, we also try to use some quantitative data coming from SMP, Global Port Data, and also liner shipping connectivity index data coming from UNCTAD and MDS Transmodal. When it comes to the survey data, we actually looked at 8 different themes, and 6 of them might be quite familiar to you because they also are very important as they are in the areas of interest of the World Port Sustainability Program. Next to those 6 themes, the 6 first themes you see on this left-hand side, we also added 2 market-related and strategic-related questions, providing you a good overview of what the market is doing and providing you also an outlook for the future, and also involving you, or at least giving you information regarding strategic decisions that port authorities are involved in.
We received 81 answers from members of the IAPH, almost half the membership of the organization. And obviously, these are the active members of the active ports, and perhaps some of them are the front runners in innovation, in adapting and implementing new themes and adjusting to the necessities. But overall, we have a good sample and we analyzed the replies received. In terms of geography, we have a rather balanced geography. We have less answers in some regions, the Americas and probably Africa, but all over Asia and Europe, and we had a good sample. Quite balanced has been the sample as regards the size of the ports that participated in this exercise. And here I'm referring to the survey. There is balance both when there is reference in throughput, but also when is reference to the container terminals and to the container ports specific market. We are going to present what we identified through the survey and also through the other data. And of course, a big thanks goes to S&P Global, but also to MDS Transmodal and UNCTAD that provided us several data to analyze and understand the market trends. A promise to those participants, but also to those providers of data, is that the report does not reveal specific ports. We are going to present trends, indexes, and evolution of practices of ports around the globe.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Thanos. And I guess the first question I'd like to ask, I mean, what may interest people attending here is whether ports are continuing to invest in the long term on infrastructure. What are your principal findings on, port sentiments from the survey on physical infrastructure investments with an eye on the long term?
Of course, we looked in infrastructures, and we started with the strategic decisions. The strategic decisions with reference to the upgrades and also the new terminal capacity that is expected to be in the market and fully operational over the next 12 months. And here reference is to the calendar year 2025. We see that 1/3 of ports continues to expand container terminals. And there we have this expansion, which, as we see later on, is also reflected to developments at the land side of the ports. At the same time, one in 5 ports is developing other types of cargo terminals. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, we see that in the case of passenger ports, the passenger terminals are not expanding at the same pace, and even in a very dynamic cruise market, the expansion of cruise terminals is taking place in just 1 out of 10 ports. That's about the new land that is coming to the market. A second thing that we explored is the capacity of the port industry in the current environment, in the current economic, social, and broader environment, to develop the plans, the strategic decisions as they have been planned. Here we examine not only more traditional dimensions of infrastructure, that means the land side or the core port infrastructure, but also we started exploring how do ports progress regarding the implementation of parts of the energy transition. overall, one can say that there are some positive trends, as especially when we talk about the land side investment, but also in the case of alternative ship fuels, we see some rather positive signs. Implementation has progressed mainly as it had been foreseen. There are though some things that are really noteworthy, which are on the more critical, on the more ambiguous side. And one of them is in the case of OPS, we see that approximately 20% of ports have experienced some minor delays, but delays are there, and a further 8% some major delays. So the progress here is challenged to a considerable number of ports. And the other issue is that when we talk about renewable energy, there we realize that several ports have experienced some major delays in implementation of either solar or wind energy related investments. These are 2 points where things have not gone as well as in the case of all other dimensions. New terminals, how the plans progressed. The third dimension is about the land use. Obviously, with container terminals developing, the expansion of the land that is assigned to container terminals is here. 1 out of 4 ports, 26% of ports expand the part of the land zone that is part of the container activities. And next to it, we see that 1 in 3 ports is going to expand the land that is used for logistics and distribution, obviously the land side of the terminals within 2025. We see that's significant because we talk about what is going to happen within the running year. So the past 5 months and the coming 6 months. On the other hand, I think that it's also interesting to note the transformation. Here, almost 20%, 19% of ports say that within the year, non-fossil related energy production will take at more land than it used to take place into 2024. So there we see a progress in non-fossil energy production. On the other hand, it's very rare the phenomenon that ports continue to invest in fossil energy production. Only 3%. That said, few ports are lowering the use of certain activities. Ports overall are expanding, and that is the strategic framework. And Theo perhaps can guide us to the more sustainability related investments, because we went further into the sustainability dimension. And Theo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thanos. Yeah, one of the things we looked into is onshore power supply. Was already mentioned on one of the slides Thanos presented, but we really wanted to know for which type of vessel OPS is being implemented. And you can see in the results that particularly for what harbor crafts and port auxiliary vessels are concerned, we see already quite a number of ports, 25% of all responding ports, indicating that they have such OPS facilities already in place. And another 7% are implementing these OPS facilities at the moment. And on the other, for the other ship types, we see particularly for cruise ships and container ships that quite a lot of things are moving. And that's also part a little bit of course, in some parts of the world, existing regulation that urges ports to take action, particularly for these type of vessels. And at the other extreme, we see that OPS is not really taking off for dry bulk carriers and for tankers. These 2 vessel types are lagging behind when it comes to OPS facilities at the relevant terminals. And the last issue I would like to mention related to this infrastructure discussion is the issue of the circular economy. The circular economy emphasizes reducing waste and promoting resource efficiency through the 3 R's: recycling, reusing, and remanufacturing. And of course, ports have a role to play there. Now, if you look at the results, we see that most progress has been made so far in the field of dredged material reuse. And I find it quite striking that 44% of all ports already have circular economy principles in place in order to deal with dredged material, and quite a few others are either at the design stage or the implementation stage. Also interesting are the water use figures. About a third of all ports are reusing water, have implemented recycling programs for water reuse. So that's also quite a high percentage already. And the same, more or less the same result for the beneficial use of waste streams. Where we're lagging behind a bit is heat reuse and industrial symbiosis. But here we have to underline that this might have to do with the fact that you need the right local industrial ecosystem in order to make these things work. And not all ports, of course, have that kind of industrial ecosystem in place.
Right. And Ted, could you just clarify on industrial symbiosis for some of us, please?
Yeah, industrial symbiosis is based on the idea that you try to maximize the exchanges of flows between companies in the same location, the same cluster, and that also includes waste. For example, heat that is being reused is also part of the broader industrial symbiosis.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, that neatly puts us over now to potentially looking at topics related to climate and energy and environmental care. Theo, I'd like to ask what ports are specifically monitoring the most in terms of their own environmental performance. Also, how detailed their carbon footprint reporting might be, because that's becoming a recent trend. If they follow any specific environmental standards and the sort of regulations they're putting in place for these new alternative fuels that Thanos was talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Victor. Let's first talk about environmental monitoring by ports. These are the results. And if you dive into the figures, you will notice that air quality is amongst the most monitored elements, environmental elements in ports. 79% of ports do monitor air quality. And for water quality also, similar percentage, even 80% of ports are monitoring water quality. So on those 2 points, ports are doing really a lot. And then you have energy consumption, also interesting. And this is, of course, a field of action where ports are particularly advancing in the last 10 years or so. You see 3/4 of the ports monitoring energy consumption. And then when it comes to carbon footprint, noise, and water consumption, they are at 2/3 of all ports. That's also quite significant figures.
Mm-hmm.
Where are they lagging behind a bit at the moment? And it's, of course, an issue that also deserves more attention. That's underwater noise. Underwater noise that is becoming a increasingly recognized issue in port operations and also offshore operations. And so I think there is some room for ports to take more action in order to also cover that part of the environmental impacts of port better in terms of their monitoring exercises.
Yeah, there's been quite an IMO focus recently as well.
Yeah. On the calculation and reporting of carbon footprint, we also had a question included, or two questions actually. One of the questions was really about what are you calculating when it comes to your carbon footprint? And interestingly enough, 29% of the ports said we're not calculating anything, but that means 71% of the ports are calculating their carbon footprint. And if I find it very reassuring that most of the 71% ports, they focus not only on scope 1, not only on scope 2, but fully or partially also on scope 3 emissions. And as we all know, monitoring and calculating scope 3 emissions is far more difficult than scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So that's the case for more than half of the ports. So they look into scope 3 emissions either fully or partially. A second one was more on what do you communicate publicly when it comes to the targets in terms of carbon neutrality. 42% of the ports indicate we're not communicating anything on our targets, our carbon targets. That means that the majority does communicate something. And there it's a little bit spread all over. Some ports only report and communicate on Scope 1 emissions, but there are also a fair share of the ports that even go up to Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. And so things are moving there, and you see indeed that ports are making efforts in order to not only include Scope 1 emissions, but also dive into the Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions.
It's interesting.
And a last point that I would like to highlight related to the issue you brought forward, Victor, relates to certification under an environmental management system. Now, when it comes to certification, ISO 14001 is the most widely recognized EMS standard. And so it's no surprise that also there most ports are reporting or certified like that. 44% of the port authorities have acquired this form of certification. The second highest is the EcoPorts PERS. EcoPorts PERS, the environmental review system. About 1 out of 5 ports is PERS certified. And most of these ports are European ports. And that is because, of course, the origins of PERS are mostly European. The same applies to EMAS. EMAS is the Eco Management and Audit Scheme. It's a kind of specific EU-developed scheme that goes beyond ISO 14001. And we see that approximately 8% of the ports are EMAS certified. And most of these ports, again, are European ports. Interestingly enough, 37% indicate they have no form of certification. So that means there is still some room to convince ports to engage in certification programs in this field.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Theo. We've talked about, these new fuels as bunkering fuels, potentially for ships and different kinds of vessels. But specifically now, when you're talking about these fuels as a cargo, as a future cargo, what does that picture look in terms of ports preparing themselves to become hubs for transporting low and zero carbon fuel?
Well, one of the important things here are the rules and procedures that have been developed in order to allow safe bunkering of low and zero carbon marine fuels. So that's one of the aspects that's relevant. What we see, if you look at the figures, is that most ports have progressed quite well when it comes to LNG and biofuels. In the case of LNG, even 1/3 of the ports already have an extensive set of rules and procedures in place for the bunkering of LNG. So that goes quite far already. Yeah. And quite a number of them are also implementing these kind of rules and procedures. For biofuels, it's about 1/4 of ports that already have these rules and procedures in place, and another 7% or so that are either designing or implementing these rules and procedures. So that's moving in the right direction. Where are we lagging behind? Well, it's particularly at the level of hydrogen, both liquid and compressed hydrogen, where things are not moving that fast. Methanol is already taking up some speed or picking up some speed. Ammonia is somewhere in between, but is also still in its infancy phase when it comes to rules and procedures.
Okay, very interesting. And just to conclude this part, Theo, what sort of trends do you see in terms of the renewable power use at ports?
Yeah. Well, before we go there, maybe one more thing on the fuels, because we haven't gone into that second aspect yet, and that relates to the implementation process of preparing the port for importing and or exporting low and zero carbon fuels as commodities, not as bunkers necessarily, but really as commodities. And the results are quite similar to what I've just shown you when it comes to the rules and procedures on bunkering. You again see most ports or the best results for ports are for LNG and biofuels. Methanol is not too far behind. That's quite interesting. So methanol as a commodity seems to be focused on by quite a lot of ports at the moment. And then again, liquid and compressed hydrogen are lagging behind. And ammonia is let's say, a slow starter, but at least it's moving in the right direction. But coming to your question that you just put forward,
Yes.
This is I find a very interesting result, a result focusing on renewable electricity produced on site in the port area, and so really in the port area, not offshore. And you can see that there is one form of renewable electricity production dominating the scene, and that's the solar solution.
That's quite a surprise.
Yeah, 80% of the ports indicate that they have some form of solar energy production in the port area. Different types of solutions there. We have, of course, the more traditional photovoltaic panels that you can find quite a lot in ports. But on top of that, quite interestingly, there are also ports experimenting with, for example, floating solar parks or vertical solar parks, and also with all kinds of concentrated solar power where you use mirror systems and so on in order to generate electricity. So it's a very diverse landscape, or it's becoming a more diverse landscape at the moment. You also see 15% of ports have wind mills in the port area, mostly on breakwaters or on existing cargo terminals. But of course, on top of that, a lot of ports play a crucial role in the supply chains for the offshore wind farms. For the rest, there's not so much going on. Hydropower and wave energy, a few ports are having facilities in that area. And surprisingly, no nuclear facilities were reported, but that's probably because some of the ports that responded indeed do not have nuclear energy production in the port area, although some others might have it.
But certainly a particular question to keep monitoring as the years go by. I'm sure the format will change over time. Thank you, Theo. Shall we move now on to the next WPSP area of interest, health, safety, and security? We'd be interested to hear from yourself and Thanos on what you've found out from the data in terms of what keeps port executives most awake at night when it comes to risk. And specifically how ports are building their resilience to avoid disruptions of their operations, because, I mean, that's becoming more and more regular in terms of disruption, right?
Yeah. Thanks so much for the question, Victor. I don't know whether port managers will be kept awake at night by these risk factors, but at least we have clear indication that some risk factors are more important than others. One of the most striking results we found was when you look at the risk factors, there is one that is really sticking out as by far the most important one, and that's cybersecurity and the cybersecurity threats. 62% of the ports reported that this is for them a high risk factor, and another 30% indicated that this is a moderate risk factor. So this is really by far the most important one. Other very important ones, and this is, I think, no surprise, natural disasters, climate change impacts. There we typically have like around 40% of the ports reporting that this to them is a very high risk factor. But there are quite some differences between ports because, of course, not all ports are vulnerable to the same kinds of natural disasters like earthquakes and so on, and also the same kinds of climate change impacts. What else is interesting to look into? Well, we saw, for example, that social unrest is the least worrying factor to port managers when it comes to risk. Only 1 out of 10 ports indicate that this is a high risk factor. And actually more than half of the ports indicated that they don't consider this as a significant risk. This was a little bit surprising, I think, but of course we have to take into account that social unrest is also something that is often quite local and might appear in some ports and might be completely absent in other ports. Other factors that might be of relevance and of interest is the factor utilization of facilities and infrastructure. I find it also quite interesting. 30% say that it's a high risk factor, but the combination of high and moderate is quite interesting because that makes it the second most important factor when you combine high and moderate. And so this is a real concern that you don't have enough facilities in place in order to accommodate the flows that you might have a situation of congestion in the port and so on. So this is something that keeps port managers busy and is a top concern, I would say.
Interesting.
For the rest, it's as you can see, the table is very elaborate. A lot of different factors we looked into, and of course, every port will recognize probably some of the factors that they consider also as a high risk factor.
Oh, thank you.
And then when it comes to the initiatives that ports are developing in the area of health, safety, and security, we can basically only bring good news. Ports are very engaged in this area. They are taking a lot of actions, implementing a lot of initiatives. One of the things we asked is, has the Port Authority established procedures for coordinated collaboration and resource sharing with relevant parties to address their priority risks? And 81%, a very high percentage of the ports indicated, yes, we do. And another 14%, they say, yeah, we partly do that. And so that's quite an interesting result. And I'll pick another one, the fourth one, the fourth bar in the graph. Has the Port Authority developed an emergency management response and coordination framework to address its priority risks? Also here, more than 3/4 of the ports indicate, yes, we have done so. And another 15% indicates we have partly done so. So at the front of health, safety, and security, very clearly ports take this up as a prime responsibility and are taking actions together with other stakeholders.
Okay, so they've definitely got a pass on that one. Shall we perhaps move on to digitalization, something that, of course, IAPH has been working a lot on in recent years. Could you tell us how ports see themselves progressing on digitalizing their processes, the sort of technologies they're deploying, and how they're protecting themselves from cybersecurity? Because you said that was one of the main concerns that they had, right?
Yes. Happy to talk about digitalization. This is a kind of spider web, a radar plot showing the adoption of emerging technologies in ports. So the percentages are the number of, or the share of ports indicating that they have already adopted that emerging technology. And you can see that the highest percentage we find when it comes to drones, 53%, so more than half of the ports indicate that drones are already operational in the port, which is quite interesting. Of course, drones can be used for different purposes. They are often used for aerial inspections of port infrastructure, superstructure, for example, for improving safety and efficiency when it comes to port operations. But they can also, of course, be used as real-time tracking devices for cargo containers, for example, in order to improve the visibility of the cargo flows. Mm-hmm. You also see automation. More than half of the ports indicate that they have implemented some form of automation and robotics. This is quite interesting. On the one hand, we see, of course, a lot of physical automation taking place, terminals that are being automated. Think of automated and semi-automated container terminals. But there's also a lot of things happening more when it comes to information flows. Think of robotic process automation, whereby you actually automate administrative tasks. And that's, of course, also an area of interest to a lot of ports. AI, a hot topic. About 37% of the ports indicate they have already implemented AI and machine learning solutions in their organization. So that's also going in the right direction, I would say. And 5G, 1/3 of the ports already have 5G installed within the port area. That's also a quite interesting result. The one that's lagging behind a bit is quantum computing, and that's normal because that technology is still in its early stages. But what's interesting to see is that some ports are experimenting with that, are trying to figure out what could quantum computing mean for us, how can we use that upcoming technology in port operations, in logistics, in supply chains, in the nautical chain, and what have you. But I think we will have to wait another decade or so before we really see a general uptake of quantum computing in port or areas.
Yeah, it's one of our next topics on our next webinar.
And then we have the implementation status of major maritime and port-related digital solutions. Of course, here several very important initiatives. First one listed here are just-in-time arrival and port call optimization solutions. You can see that 28% of the ports already have these kind of solutions in place, operational. And then quite a number, about a quarter of the ports already are either designing these solutions or are already implementing such solutions. And so that means that more than half of the ports are actively working on the realization of these kind of things or already have it in place. When it comes to port community systems, we see slightly less than half of the ports already have a port community system in place. And another 18% or so are either designing or implementing such port community systems. So also there, things are advancing, and quite a number of ports have already that type of solution in place. And then the last thing we looked into are the National Maritime Single Window issue. The National Maritime Single Window is legally mandated under the IMO FAL Convention, as you know. But of course, there are also additional regional and national frameworks and regulations in place. And we can see from the results that more than half of the ports already have implemented a national maritime single window solution, but a lot more are implementing it right now. So also in that field, things are moving, and it will be very interesting to see how things evolve also in the coming years.
Yeah, work needs to be done, but the last time we did a study in 21, it was roughly a third, and a third. So the bar has moved, but there's still work to be done, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then maybe a last thing, indeed, the cybersecurity issue, as mentioned before, it's considered as the factor that presents the highest risks according to the ports. So what are they doing? Well, very good news is that cybersecurity is consistently considered in the implementation process of emerging technologies. I recall the technical committee days in London, where we also had a discussion on this topic and also on the guidelines that have been presented. And so it's very good news to see that 83% of the ports indicate that they are already taking into account cybersecurity whenever they are implementing new technologies. So that's very good news.
Yeah, and we've got some upcoming guidelines that the DCC committee have developed, which will launch in middle of June, which talk about those and how to handle cyber protection. Yeah.
So it's good. It's on the radar, and ports are actively working with that already. We also asked whether cybersecurity is part of a broader initiative whereby they coordinate with others in order to improve cybersecurity. Well, we see that about half of the ports already are part of a cybersecurity coordination network. That can be a kind of formal setting, but can also be a more informal setting whereby different stakeholders exchange ideas and collaborate in order to make things happen. But we see also that another 21% of ports indicate they've partially done that. So they are moving in that direction, and they are taking steps in order to also develop these kind of cybersecurity coordination networks. So also in that field, things are moving, and I would say it's also necessary to do so, given the sheer risk linked to cyber threats.
Right. And then for the final area of interest of the World Port Sustainability Programme, community building, can you just focus and give us an idea of what efforts ports are most concentrating on, and also maybe areas where ports can improve?
Yeah. Well, in terms of community building, ports, of course, they take action. They develop initiatives to strengthen the relationships between ports and the communities that surround them. Very important element. And also there, we see lots of positive news, I would say. We see that there are hardly any ports that are not investing resources in community building initiatives. So the percentage of no in all the bars is relatively small to very small. What are they doing? Well, we see more than half of the ports already have initiatives in place to support vulnerable local communities, to reduce poverty, and to address inequalities. So that's not the prime focus in the community building sphere, but it is an important one, and we see more than half of the ports already doing that, and another 22%, already partly developing that. Also in the field of education and training, there's a lot of things happening. 60% of the ports indicate they already have taken initiatives to support education and training programs targeting skills required for current but also future port workforce. And I think the future part is also extremely important given the fast technological changes that are taking place in the market. And these educational and training programs are also seen as a very important a tool in order to attract talent to the industry. And we know a lot of ports are, of course, looking for talent, are looking for skilled people who can help them to accomplish their targets. What we also see is that a lot of ports are organizing all kinds of events in order to reach out to the general public, open days, port musea, all kinds of other things that they are supporting in order to make sure that indeed the general public gets in touch with the port, with the active port, not only with the history of the port, and that of course also helps to build the community. And then a last element, and that's for about 7 out of 10 ports the case. There are a lot of ports that are investing in procedures and structures in order to have a more systematic approach when dealing with community stakeholders. So to involve community stakeholders in a structured way in all kinds of discussions relevant to the port and the broader port-city interaction, for example.
Okay. Well, that's a fantastic overview, Teo, of the main sustainability trends and in all 6 areas of interest. And, the engagement by ports, we can also confirm that, we closed the entries for the World Port Sustainability Awards for 2025, and we had, Antonis told me this morning, we had well over 120 entries from well over 80 ports. So it's very clear that the ports are now making efforts in all areas, some more than others, achieving progress. But it's very important we continue monitoring this, right, Teo?
Yeah. There's one more thing I would like to bring forward, and that's the representation of women, and that's maybe interesting as well. Yes. We placed it under the community building theme. So, but I think it's also interesting to look into that. If you look at the share of women working at different levels of the Port Authority organization, our survey results basically reveal a significant disparity in the representation of women when you compare the share of women in port supervisory boards compared to the overall presence within the port authorities. And the results show it very clearly. So if you look at the top bar, you can see that when you talk about a representation of women 31% or more in supervisory boards, well, that only happens in 17% of the ports. And if you look at the same summation of 2 bars for the entire organization, then it becomes 47%. So that means that's much higher. And also on the underrepresentation, ports that say women only represent less than 10%, you can see that's the case in 44% of the cases where you look at supervisory boards or similar settings, and only in 16% of the cases when you look at the representation of women across all levels of the Port Authority. So in this field, there is still some gap to be closed, I would say, but at least we have figures across the world now, and that, of course, gives you already some insight on what's going on there.
No,
that's all. Let's say that's a closing element, a closing note on the sustainability.
No, there's clearly work to be done there, and the purpose of these surveys is to identify the gaps where there's clearly one in this aspect. So we shall definitely monitor this one as well. Thank you very much, Teo. Perhaps now, as I'm looking at the time, but let's switch to market trends now, and maybe yourself, Thanos. And first in the container industry, maybe can you give us a broad overview of what you found from the S&P Global Performance data and then also the UNCTAD MDS transmodal data, respectively?
All right, thank you, Victor. We move to a different area, but equally important, the trends in container ports. Here we had the opportunity to work with actual data provided by shipping lines, ports, and collected by S&P Global. We have something here, we have some trends which indicate a very important transition, I would say. We have four different variables, and as we see in during a year-on-year basis, we see that the number of vessel calls, the number of container ship calls has decreased in most regions of the world on a year-on-year basis, excluding Africa, where obviously the implications of the Red Sea crisis might have contributed to this positive trend, the redirection of various vessels. We see that in other regions, there has been a decline of the number of vessel calls, which is even double-digit one on an annual basis. Combined, I would invite our participants to look also at the third column, where it's the percentage of container ships that are over 8,500 at the use capacity. And we see that again here, we see that over the last years, we have less number of calls by the big vessels. The overall implication is the squeeze, the second column, the call size. The call size, the number of containers that are loaded or are unloaded at ports per call has increased significantly. I would say that Northeast Asia, North Europe, and Latin America are the places where this has even reached double-digit percentages. So every call means that ports need to serve far more cargo than they used to do a year before. And that has implications on productivity. You will see here that when we look at port moves per hour, what has been the performance of ports around the globe in most areas has been lower than it had been a year before, into 2023. A major annual improvement in Africa, but we'll have the opportunity to go to see the longer term perspective, and in Oceania, but in other regions, we see that the number of container moves per hour is not as high as it was a year before.
Right.
Let's go to the 5 years evolution, because I think that's really interesting. Could be a very temporal phenomenon, but the number of calls in all cases except Africa is lower in all different regions. We analyzed 9 different regions. The number of calls is lower. The call size has increased over 5 years since we count this evolution since 2019, both the 2 years of the pandemic, but the 4 years after. And we see that since then, over these 6 years, it's a very, very significant increase of the call size. Containers, the bigger container ships are deployed in the Trans-Pacific trade. That's why we see that, Latin and North America, South and North the Americas, and Northeast Asia. This is the trade where the bigger vessels are deployed, and that they are deployed more frequently. In the other regions, we have smaller vessels deployed with bigger quantities of cargoes to unload at each call. Interestingly, but I will not focus here on the fourth column. We have prepared 2 interesting figures on the evolution. What has happened in the 9 regions that we examined regarding the number of port moves per hour? Comparing to 2019, Northeast Asia stands really higher, 19% higher. Southeast Asia is also standing 6% higher, and Africa is the region where the moves per hour that take place in container ports have increased. Both European regions, and especially Middle East and region and India, North America, and the Americas and Oceania stand at a very at a lower place. Obviously, productivity is many more things than moves per hour, but here, focusing on the particular aspect of the operational efficiency, we see that there is a change and that ports seem that they overall as an industry, with obviously exceptions per individual port, they seem to face some difficulties to cope with this transition that is taking place. And that is the analysis of the data for container ports. We looked also at the broader picture, and the broader picture is the levels of connectivity, the evolution of liner shipping connectivity. Here we have data that are also collected by the specialized agent of the United Nations, UNCTAD, and they reflect the extent and the number of calls, the number of big-sized vessels, but also further dimensions like the frequency of connectivity with other ports, direct connections with other ports, number of shipping lines, and that are involved in the trades of different locations, territories, or countries, and we have the overall picture. And in the overall picture, we see that we comparing Q4 24 with Q4, the last quarter of 24 with the last quarter of 2023, we see again that there are regions, the European regions, north and south, have been cases where we see some lower levels of connectivity. On the other hand, Latin America and Africa are the cases where we see some improvements, particularly Brazil and Nigeria, respectively. In these two regions, we have seen some really considerable improvements in terms of percentage improvements. We see at a one-year level mixed picture in Southeast Asia, but then if we go and look at Northeast Asia, it's very interesting to see that the dynamics in the case of China comparing to the other regions on a year, on an annual basis. What's more interesting though is the long-term trend, because the long-term trend illustrates an evolution. And when we go to the Americas, we see that in the case of Latin America, in all most connected locations, the levels of connectivity are improving. But when we go to the European market, we see that there is some deterioration of the levels of connectivity in North Europe. Germany in particular and Netherlands are the two countries where the levels of connectivity do not stand at a lower level in 2025 comparing to 2019. And for this reason, the Netherlands now are out of the 10 most connected places of the world where they had been for many years. Going to the Middle East and India, I would highlight the improvement of India, which is and Pakistan, which both are really significant. And heading to Asia, we can see that first of all, I would start with Southeast Asia, where Vietnam and Thailand look very dynamic, the countries where maritime trade is well connected. And then leading to Northeast Asia, here we see that China, which is the best connected country of the world, and South Korea to a lesser extent, have really improved their connectivity levels. Okay. I know that we are going to struggle because of time, but a very quick view on the 10 best connected countries or territories around the world. And here we see, I think that it's an interesting table from our report. Tito and I thought that it's interesting because it illustrates how China and South Korea keep expanding their levels of connectivity. We have a very good improvement of the levels of connectivity in Vietnam, which looks very dynamic, and obviously it's in the news quite a lot due to its increase in its participation in the national maritime trade, and from Europe, Spain. some other countries are losing ground. Here in this table, the administrative region of Hong Kong is the one. And as I briefly said, we have now the Netherlands, which are not part of the top 10, as they have lost ground over the last 6 years in the terms of their connectivity. So that's an overall analysis. There are more regional analysis within our report.
Yes, and we will be producing regional analysis. So there have been a few questions in the chat on all of these categories, which we'll be presenting to our regions later in the year. Thank you. If we start talking, reports were asked prior to the outbreak of what was initially a trade war that's calmed down, that apparently has been ramped up between the US and Europe this afternoon, and what appears to be an unbalanced situation. But could you give us an idea of the forecast for growth this year by cargo segment and for passengers that they gave us when we asked all our members at the beginning of the year?
Yes, indeed, that's something that we looked into. The expectations of ports, obviously, the things are dynamic. We started our survey in February and we concluded in early March. And here, as you will see, the dark blue barrier is the percentage of ports which talk about a rather stable situation, plus minus 2%. That's what we consider as a stable situation. And you will see that, okay, we have a majority talking about absence of major surprises, but overall, the sentiment, if we talk about the containers market, then we see that over 50% was thinking that things will increase. The cargo that will be served would increase by more than 2%, even more than 25%. We're expecting more than 5% increase. You go to the dry bulk market again. We did not identify ports that were foreseen that dry bulk or even would be less in 2025. Dry bulk cargoes to be served would be less than the year before. Only a marginal 3%. I was talking about 2 to 5 decrease. All the rest, and here again, if you would add the 3 positive barriers, we talk about almost half of them were all looking positive. Everything was looking positive for them to a lesser or to a greater extent. 10% in the tankers and the gas carriers was on the pessimistic. Could we tell it like that? A question mark here, but we're expecting some lower cargoes, but again, 2 to 5%. None of them was looking for major decreases, and 28% was looking for a range of 2 to 10% increase. Surprisingly, in the most dynamic market, but also a market which is subject to many changes periodically, the cruise market, here we see that there was a 15% of ports which were a bit skeptical on the prospects for 2025. The rest of them, and here we see they even a greater part of them, we talk about 70% of the ports which were expecting things to go on the positive way, even to 20% was talking about more than 16%, was talking about more than 10% increase of their vessels. But that was February and March. Things might change still.
Yes.
Could have changed.
Yeah. I think I'll pass over to Theo now, because I know we packed a lot into this webinar, but I think we might like to ask our participants to maybe give us some sentiments. Yeah.
Yes. So what we have in mind is to present you with a question, a poll basically, that basically links up to the chart you see in front of you. And who can you, or Ellie, can you show the poll question, please? So the poll question is basically focusing on the outlook for the near future. Now that we have progressed to May and lots of things have changed, particularly in terms of trade tensions, what do you see the expected outcome for cargo volumes overall in your port developing in 2025 compared to 2024? And the answers are similar to the way we have included such a question in the survey. So you indicate where the growth will be between 0 and 5%, 5 to 10%, more than 10%, and so on. And if all goes well, we should be able to present you with the results soon.
Okay, so are we showing that now?
Yes, there it is.
Okay, let's see how the responses are going. Just keep going with the responses if you're a port. You're looking at quite stable and then decrease.
It's almost 50-50
in
terms of increase versus decrease. Very interesting. So a rather different result from what we have just shown you. But of course, that was a snapshot of the situation in February, March of this year.
Okay, well, with that and with all the analytics and studies, I also would like to say thank you very much, Thanos and Teo, for the analysis and also for your insights in this webinar. For those attendees asking, and there have been quite a few people asking, yes, this presentation will be available and sent to you as a registered attendee. There's also a press release going out with an executive summary of the report, and members can, of course, access the report in the back end of the IAPH website, and you can get credentials to enter that. To round off the webinar, may I pass over to Patrick?
Thank you, Victor, and thank you, Thanos and Theo, for that very comprehensive presentation. I think it's a good start with our annual State of the Ports Industry Report, as I like to refer to it, also known as the World Ports Tracker. And I think the reference was made a couple of times also by Victor. This is really useful information, of course, for members, and that they can sort of compare where their port is compared to, let's say, the global trends, and for some regions also the regional trends. But it is equally important for us in IAPH to keep in touch with what is actually happening within the port industry. Where are there gaps? Where is there a role for IAPH to play a role in helping close those gaps? And the example of cybersecurity, which was mentioned as the top #1 risk, incidentally, also by our colleagues of the International Chamber of Shipping, who also have a similar kind of barometer going on amongst their members, came up with the same answer. And that means that the production, for instance, of the new cyber guidelines, which are related to emerging technologies and which will be published next month, are very timely and very needed at this stage. So thank you very much for that great work that you've done in producing this report. And of course, as I said in the beginning, also warmest thanks to all the members who contributed to the survey. And we will contact you, of course, later, beginning of next year, for the update, so that this becomes an annual tradition and that we can start measuring also evolution in these various indicators. And for those ports who listened in today and didn't join, I hope it will encourage you to also participate in the next edition. To conclude, I just wanted to give you a quick heads up of the upcoming webinars, because we have 3 more planned for this year. And the next one is coming up quite soon already. It will be within a month, on 25 June. And we talked about emerging technologies and cybersecurity. Well, this webinar will be fully devoted to that. The impact of quantum computing and AI on security, and what can be done to use these technologies in a cyber secure way. Then after the summer in, let's say, the Northern Hemisphere, we will have a webinar devoted to the net zero framework of the IMO that was adopted in April and will be formally confirmed, let's say, in October. What does that all mean for ports? The measures that were introduced, including the economic measure or market-based measure, what will be the impact for that? And then the last one of the year is on the 3rd of December, where we will, and this is after COP, the Climate Conference 30 in Belém in Brazil, where we will talk about investment in port decarbonization infrastructure, clean energy, marine hubs. What is the risk there, and how can we manage that risk? But one, and if not the most important date, is not on this slide, but that is the date of the World Ports Conference, which is from 7 to 9 October in Kobe, Japan, our 70th anniversary edition, very special one. You have until the end of this month to benefit from the best possible rate, the early bird rate. It will expire at the end of the month. Have a look at the website www.worldpodsconference.com, where you will find the program, the speakers. It's really looking exciting. We got big names added as we speak to the agenda, and it's all about doing business in very uncertain and turbulent times. So make sure that you don't miss that one. And with that publicity announcement, I think, Victor, we can wrap it up here. Again, many thanks to all who made this webinar possible. Also, many thanks to the colleagues at Mercator Media who have facilitated and organized this, and to all of you, of course, in attending. Have a lovely weekend and see you very soon.